Hi everyone, my name is Giovanna Proença and today we're going to talk about Project 1 Wiki of CS50 web programming with Python and JavaScript. So, if you would like to have full support from a programming expert, check the description below. And we totally discourage plagiarism, so this video solution is made for those who have already completed their assignment and want to have an alternative view about the problem. Okay? So basically the main idea of Wiki is design a Wikipedia-like online encyclopedia, alright? So here we're gonna start adding some logic in Django, HTML, CSS, alright? Things that we saw in the previous lectures, and we're gonna start applying here. All right. I already downloaded here the project. Okay, like we can see here we have the encyclopedia folder, entries, and wiki. So wiki, it's the root of our project, okay, where we contain the settings.py, urls.py. All right, entries is the folder where we're gonna store all the entries of our Wikipedia. For example, CSS. If we open up here Django, it's a page in Markdown, MD, and here we have Django. Django is a web framework, blah blah blah. So this is the entries we're gonna display in our encyclopedia, and we have the encyclopedia folder where it's our Django app. Okay, this is where we're gonna work with. So basically in here we have the views.py like we're seeing right now, okay? We have this index function that is displaying the index.html, and we're displaying all the entries using this function util.listEntries. We're gonna see what is this util and the functions that we have available. We have the urls.py where we contain all the paths, so here we're gonna modify along the project. Views.py we're gonna modify along the project as well, and we're gonna build more HTML files in here. One thing that is important to notice is that we have a layout.html, okay, that is creating the structure of the page. So for example here, wiki, we have a form, we have some divs, and what is this layout? I'm already running here the project. The layout is creating this sidebar here for us, okay? And this is the index page that is being rendered. So let's take a look at the index. Basically the index.html, we're rendering all pages and we're doing a loop. For entry in entries, we're listing inside this loop where every item in the unordered list is one entry. Okay, and what is this entries here? This entries is a list of entries. We're passing this variable entries from our backend to our frontend. So we're sending from Python to HTML. And in here, we're using this function util.listEntries that is returning to us all the entries we have available. So if we take a look here, we have CSS, Django, Git, HTML, and Python. And this is exactly what are the entries we are displaying: CSS, Django, Git, HTML, and Python. Okay, so before we start, let's see what we have in the util.py. So now let's take a look at util.py. Okay, so basically in util.py we have three functions that we can use, all right, and we must use, otherwise we won't be able to do the exercises here we have to do, okay, the task we have to do. So basically let's understand what they are. So list entries function. The list entry function returns a list of all names of encyclopedia entries. So basically once we call this function, it will return us the name of all encyclopedia entries. Okay, and we're gonna see this happening in a second. The save entry function saves an encyclopedia entry, giving its title and markdown content. If an existing entry with the same title already exists, it is replaced. So basically we're gonna use the save entry to save new entries that we want to add. For example, if I want to add one entry about coffee or chocolate, we will be able to use this save entry. But when it times, we're gonna see how it works. Okay, but right now I want you to know all the tools we are available to use. And the get entry, we have to pass the title, and this get entry function retrieves an encyclopedia entry by its title. If no such entry exists, the function returns none. So the get entry, we're gonna check if the entry already exists or not. Okay, this is basically it. So let's see this working. For example, I created a variable called entries, and I'm using here the list of entries. I'm calling the function list entries. I created here a variable called CSS file, and here I am calling the function get entries, and I'm passing CSS as title. And then I'm creating a variable called coffee, and I'm passing coffee as a title for the getEntry function, okay? Let's run and debug and see what happens, because basically the run and debug, we're gonna see what is going on inside of our code, okay? And we can take a look at what's actually going on. So let me expand this part. So now the debugger is working, okay, and we're gonna take a look in here. So the first thing we're checking is if we wanna see what is entries, right? And we're calling the function util_list_of_entries. Here, once we run this line in here, we're gonna see here in the debugger that entries, that is the function, the variable we just made, it's a list with the name of all entries we have available, okay? So this is what the list entry is returning to us. And if we take a look, this is exactly all the entries we have available here in our code. Okay, so CSS, Django, Git, HTML, and Python, and this is exactly what we're seeing here, entries, CSS, Django, Git, HTML, and Python, okay? So it's a regular list. Then let's see the CSS file. So here we're calling the function getEntry, and we're passing CSS as a title of the entry. So we're checking if the file CSS exists. And once we run in here, we're gonna see the variable CSS file, and it is returning to us all the content of the CSS file. So I'm gonna open up in here. The CSS file in here, we have CSS. CSS is a language that can be used to add style to blah, blah, blah. And if we take a look in here, the CSS file variable contains all this markdown content, okay? So the getEntry will return to us the markdown content if the title exists. Otherwise, now I want to show you if the entry does not exist. Here we have coffee. But if we take a look at our entries, we don't have coffee here as an entry, okay? So once we run this line, here coffee will be none. This means that we don't have any file with name coffee, okay? So we're gonna kind of use these three functions. The save entry I didn't show here because I wanted to show you in the future, okay? But this is basically how it works. The list entry will return the list of all entries that already exist. The get entry, we're gonna check if it exists or not. If it does not exist, it's gonna return us none. If it exists, it will return us the markdown content, okay? Now that we have all of this in our hands, let's start our project. So normally when we're doing the projects of CS50, I would tell you to start from the first bullet point until the end. But in this particular case, we're going to do the last bullet point first, and then we're going to follow all the bullet points we have in here, okay? So why we should do the last one first? Because here they are telling us to do the markdown to HTML conversion, okay? And why this is extremely important? Because, for example, the first part that we have to do in here is to create an entry page. So we're gonna create a detail page for the entry. And we're only able to do this if we're able to convert Markdown to HTML. And why we have to convert? Because all of our entries are in MD files, Markdown files, okay? But we just know how to work with this in HTML, okay? We just learned how to do this in HTML. So right now, let's understand how can we convert Markdown to HTML, and then we apply in here. Each encyclopedia entry will be saved as a Markdown file inside of the entries directory. On each entries page, any Markdown content in the entry file should be converted to HTML before being displayed to the user. To do this, we will import the Markdown library and then use the markdown.converter function. This function gets a Markdown content, for example, star bool star, and convert it into an HTML content, p tag, am tag, bool, am, p tag, closing tags. So like we saw in the animation, it's pretty simple to convert, right? We just need to import a library, and we just need to use those things. If you don't know where it is, you can click in this link and it will open up this page for us, okay? And we just need to do these steps like we saw in the animation. So we need to import here from Markdown to import Markdown. So we're gonna put it in the top of our views.py, okay? Then what am I gonna do? One thing that they tell us to do in here is to install the Markdown 2. That's why it's complaining about my line 3. So we're going to install in our terminal. Okay, so I'm gonna stop here the terminal, and I'm gonna install in here the project, okay? And while it's installing, let's continue in here. So after we convert, we need to create this variable markdown or equals to markdown, and we say convert and the variable we want to do, okay? But it won't be that simple because we need to know what function we're going to convert, right? So to do this, let's create a function in here that I'm going to call def convert MD to HTML, okay? And to do this, we're gonna receive the title of the whatever we want to convert. So basically in this function, I want to check if we're trying to convert a markdown to HTML, a file that exists, okay, an entry that already exists. So to do this, I'm gonna create here content, for example, okay, and I'm gonna call the function util.getEntry, and I'm gonna pass the title. All right. Then we're going to use what we got from that link that CS50 gave to us. So markdowner equals to markdown, and then markdowner.convert. Here, what we're gonna do, this convert, after creating the markdowner equals to markdown, we're gonna do an if statement. So if content is equals none, we're gonna return none, because this means that the title does not exist, so we don't have any file to convert, okay? We don't have any markdown file to convert. So if we receive markdown content, we're gonna convert this markdown content. So we're gonna do here content, and we're gonna return this, okay? Because this markdown.convert will convert the markdown into HTML. So basically in this function, we're doing pretty much everything we need. We're checking if the file exists. If does not exist, we're gonna return none. If exists, we are converting the markdown to HTML. Okay, and then we're ready to continue. Now I'm gonna check why we're having this issue in here, and we'll be right back. So basically I fixed it here doing some things. I changed it here to import markdown, not markdown true, okay? And here instead of markdown true, I put markdown.markdown, okay? And also I did pip install markdown. Okay, and right now our page is working fine as well. All right, so basically we created here the function convert MD to HTML. Okay, right now we are able to start working with the other parts that we need to do. So let's take a look at the first bullet point. Entry page. Visiting /wiki/title, where title is the title of an encyclopedia entry, should render a page that displays the contents of that encyclopedia entry. The view should get the content of the encyclopedia entry by calling the appropriate util function. And if the entry request does not exist, we need to display a page saying that it's not found. And if the entry exists, we need to display the content of this entry, okay? So basically here we're gonna use the convert function, okay, the convert to markdown. So before we start, let's see this part here of visiting wiki/title, where title is the title of the encyclopedia entry. If you remember from lecture 3, we have this example here of the greet, okay, where we say, for example, in here we have hello Harry, and how our code knows that we're saying Harry or Connor to display here. Because if you take a look here in the URL, we have hello/Harry or hello/Connor. So this way, this is the name that appears here in the URL will be the name that we're gonna display in the page. And how can we do this? Basically in here, we have, this is the path in our URL, okay? And we can use this property here, angular bracket str, and you say a name of a variable. In this case, they are using name. In our case, it can be title, for example. This notation here tells that we're expecting to receive a string, but we don't know which string it will be, okay? So whatever string we receive in here in the URL, we're gonna use, if you take a look in views.py, we are receiving here the variable name that we're getting from the URL, and we're using here in our function. So this is one way of getting a variable from the URL and using in our views.py, and this will be exactly what we're gonna do. Okay, so let's start creating the path in here. So in urls.py, we're gonna create a path that needs to contain wiki and the title. So to display the title, we're gonna say that it's a string, and here we can say title. We're saying that we wanna do this. wiki/title, okay? Now let's continue. More than this, we need to say views dot, and we need to create the name of a function. So here I'm gonna create a function called entry, def entry, and I wanna pass request and title, okay? And here I'm just gonna return right now just to make this function so we can work in here in URLs. So the function we wanna use here is entry, and the name I'm gonna give entry. Okay, these are the notations that we need when we're working with Django. Now that we built this, let's see what happens. Now let's start working in here in our views.py. Okay, so far what we need to do, we need to check if the user is giving to us the title of a file, an entry that exists or not. So we're gonna call the function. How can we check? We're gonna call our convert markdown to HTML, because this function will already tell us if the file exists, and if not, it's gonna return none, but if exists, it will already return us the HTML content. Okay, so we're gonna check in here HTML content. I'm gonna create this function, this variable, and I'm going to call the function convert markdown to HTML, and I'm gonna pass title. So if HTML content is equal to none, this means that this file does not exist. So we're gonna render a error message. So here return render, and I'm gonna do request. And in here, I'm going to create a file that I'm going to call error. New file, error.html. Okay. And in this file, I'm going to copy here basically what we have in the index, this extends layout and so on. Okay. But I'm going to change some things. Here, I'm going to display a message saying error. And then we're going to display in a paragraph a message. But right now, I'm going to leave this empty. Okay. In this error message, I need to say that I want to display encyclopedia/error.html. We need to say that we want to render this page. Okay? Otherwise, if the HTML content is not none, we want to return the content of the markdown in our HTML file. So here I'm going to create a file called entry.html. And again, I'm gonna copy and paste everything we saw in there. And I'm gonna display right now just one heading saying hi. Okay, entry. Just to check, I wanna display this. So we're gonna do return, render, request, encyclopedia/entry.html. Okay, and that's it. This is what I wanna do right now just to show you how it works. Okay, so let's test. If I go in here and I refresh our page, and if I put in here, for example, /wiki/CSS,